The Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons beta is going on right now, and anyone can do it, but there's only 3 specs out, so the Harbinger, which is the Necromancer, the Willbender, which is the Guardian, and the Virtuoso, which is the Mesmer, and I've been enjoying that a lot. Now, first of all, let me preface this by saying that this is a beta, and a lot of the new specs haven't been fully fleshed out, and there's a lot of bloat that is on the Path of Fire and Heart of Thorns specs that you won't see on the new specs because they just haven't been balanced towards the current balance. So they're going to be maybe a little bit undertuned, but I'm going to be looking at the basically main mechanics of the class and understanding how that works out and showing some gameplay. So first of all, let's talk about the Virtuoso's mechanic, which is blades. So you no longer have clones, you have blades. So whenever you summon a phantasm, normally a phantasm turns into a clone after it does its attack, but instead you're going to get a blade, and you can see the blades above you. So instead of there being a clone out in the world which has travel time to shatter or can be cleaved out, you have a blade, so you keep those and no one can stop you from having those. Now when you shatter, the clone doesn't run in, right? Because you have a blade, you shoot out a projectile instead. Now those are blockable projectiles, so there's a lot of counterplay to projectiles, which I think maybe it should be unblockable projectiles because a Mesmer is more about magic than actual physical things. So maybe I'm thinking that it should be unblockable, but it can be tuned up later in the future. And yeah, all of the shatters, they have cast times, which also adds a little bit more counterplay as well because you can't be loading a ton of animations on top of each other. So it's a very linear kind of ranged DPS playstyle. And right now, yeah, I think that the blades are a little bit slow. It kind of like chucks them out rather than like shooting them as if it were some magical blade. It's more like a physical blade. So I feel like, yeah, maybe it needs to be a little bit faster and less counterplayable because you first of all have to cast it. So there's a lot of counterplay to that already. And then you have, everything is pretty much the same, damage on the F1, Condi on the F2, and then there's a daze on the F3. The daze maybe could be a little bit faster. I mean, like a cast time on an interrupt ability, it feels like, are you really going to be able to interrupt someone with something that's not only a cast time, but also a projectile? So it feels like, yeah, the F3 maybe needs to be a little bit faster too, especially. And then the Blade Turn Requiem is a lower cooldown distortion, but it's only a block. And then you'll do this AoE around you that can do a little bit of damage. Obviously, it's also a little bit undertuned, but it can proc things like your Shattered Concentration every pulse, so you can remove quite a bit of boons. So it's a little bit more aggressive than defensive, even though Distortion kind of allowed you to be aggressive anyways, because you could do animations while you were invulnerable. So I feel maybe like this is supposed to be a super range DPS role, and you don't have a lot of defense on it, right? So that's kind of where the core mechanics are. But because there's no clones, it also changes a lot of other skills. For example, like the Sword 3, right? You don't port in between the clone anymore because there's no clone. So what they changed it to is a leap. The leap actually does pretty decent damage. It's one of the few things that I feel was tuned properly. And then you can port back to the location. So you can do a lot of juke plays with that. I like it because you don't need a target to actually get that movement. So in World versus World, where you need to be kiting a lot, it's really good. I feel like this is a World versus World spec, to be honest. So I was using a lot in World versus World roaming. And yeah, the Blade Leap is really good. So you just port back, and it gives you like 10 seconds to port back as well. So it's very versatile. Also, Greatsword 2 is a little bit weird because normally you create a clone on the first hit and then it bounces between the clone and the target. So now it doesn't do that anymore. So you actually have to summon your phantasms and then bounce it between your phantasms so that, if you don't have anything near the target, it'll literally just hit the target once and then not bounce. So it's a little bit weird there. Maybe, I don't know if that can be changed at all, but yeah, it's a little bit weird. So some of the core weapon skills have been changed to meet that. And mostly I would say that blade renewal is really the only viable kind of utility that you can get from the Virtuoso. The heal skill is a little bit clunky right now, but the Ether Feast actually scales with every blade you have, and normally you have a max of 3 clones, but now you have 5 blades, so this can heal for 9,000. So yeah, it's pretty strong. But basically what I like to do is I'll use my F1 shatter. Here's my build, by the way. I just have top mid in domination, illusion, and virtuoso. The decisions I made is not really that important because some things are kind of based on like the scaling that it is in right now, so I wouldn't take it too literally, this build. But yeah, this is just what I'm going for, and I have Fireworks Rune and a mix of Marauder and Zerker. The traits are all not insanely interesting, to be honest. I feel like the blocking and dodging aspect doesn't really make sense to me, because if you're a ranged DPS, you're not really in the action, right? So maybe it should be a different mechanic, whereas this feels like you want to be more dueling and 1v1ing, but then the mechanic is like range DPS and it's squishy, so I don't know. It doesn't work out to me. And then like they made some of the things that I actually thought would be good for the role of this build, like where you shoot out an extra blade, it does like not enough damage, so it really doesn't work out. So I didn't take those traits, but if they actually scale it up to a reasonable level, I would really like these traits. But yeah, they kind of just do no damage, so I just took them off. But yeah, essentially, if the class is, you know, tuned properly and balanced properly, I feel like it's actually pretty fun, because I was playing around with a lot of the sword 3 and doing jukes, and then you can actually hit pretty hard. There's a weird mechanic where if you crit with a blade, it inflicts vuln, but literally everything that I do is a blade, I think, because it's like, oh, you're using a sword and you're using a greatsword, that must be a blade. So every kind of attack that I do is just giving out vulnerability. You can see my phantasms don't give vuln, so I don't know, maybe that's intended, but yeah, you do a lot of vuln, so I kind of like the vulnerability synergy from domination. And then you really need Shatterstorm, because the whole spec is based around your blades, so you kind of really want illusions and Shatterstorm. And I feel as if these shatters should have lower cooldowns, because that's kind of what the spec revolves around. Like, you don't have the clones to give you pressure in between your shatters, so like what are you doing in between then, right? So I feel like there needs to be more shatter synergy, because it's not like you're sitting there getting value off of having blades there, other than maybe Ether Feast. So yeah, there's some issues that could be fixed, but in general, yeah, it's pretty fun. And I will show you guys some gameplay of me roaming in World vs. World now. So enjoy.